It should be live. Cool. Let me just mute that. Yeah, once anyone in the chat basically confirms that they can hear me, then I'll get going. Cool. Can hear me. Nice. Right. Yeah, any questions that are put in the chat log, I'll answer, but I've got... this is being recorded for one aim, so I need to... Well, for one main other aim other than the Q&A. I need to remember to do this at the start. So, for anyone listening to this or watching it live, but probably listening via the podcast app, the Hermitix site is now changed, so that's hermitix.net has changed to become sort of the primary hub for Hermitix, as it should have been for a long time, but I'm just not very good with web design and web stuff. So if you go onto hermitix.net now, there is now... you'll see all the new episodes on one side, and then there's a news side on the right where I'll be talking about more events and reading groups and things. But there's also in the top bar now a forum, which the link to which is hermitix.discourse .group, hermitix.discourse.group, and that's really going to be the hub for long-form discussion with regards to episodes, topics, themes of the podcast. So it's now like a central forum, old-style sort of forum. Anyone who knows what discourse is, it's a discourse. So that's there, and also on the website now is like an easier way to get access to the Discord, which is sort of more of a live chat type thing if you're interested and want to chat. So that is pretty much all of that. So hermitix.net and everything's there, so that's all changed. And the only other thing I need to announce, though obviously there's not too many people watching live at the moment, is that on Monday at 7, we're starting on Monday at 7 p.m. GMT or UK time. We're starting the St. Augustine's Confessions reading group. We're just going through one book, so there's 13 books in St. Augustine's Confessions, and we're just going one book per week, and that'll be every Monday at 7 p.m. UK time. And if you go on there, if you go on the website hermitix.net, it's in the news section, and you will see a Confessions reading group link, and within that is the link to the room that we'll be using, and you just click that at the time and we'll be in there. So that's really everything. So with that, I can begin with the questions. I've got a big list which I've compiled over like the last few weeks that I've got to get through anyway, but as I usually do, I will just continue doing the ones that are in the chat so I make sure I don't miss them. Do I consider Emil Choron, a kind of mystic? Yeah, I do, in a way. I've said before that I find Emil Choron's work surprisingly hopeful. Like, he's the guy, in a way, when you're in that sort of despondency, despair, that sort of feeling, which I don't think for Choron is predominantly emotional, primarily emotional. I think it's something more than that. It's like a metaphysical emotion that he's experiencing, that he's someone who's gone beyond existentialism in a certain sense, and beyond nihilism in a certain way. Choron is the companion you want with you. You don't want someone who's trying to tell you everything is going to be all right, because it's almost like Choron has already solidified that point, and then you have to continue on with life. So Choron's the guy you want as a companion at those points in life, even though he would want to be left alone. But I think he's a mystic in that sense, that he's sort of like a mystic with regards to zero, and he's like a nihilistic mystic in a way. And I mean, if you read of Tears and Saints, it's clear that he has a fairly in-depth knowledge of the church, of orthodoxy, and of what we could consider sort of early church ideas. I mean, Of Tears and Saints is one of my favourite Chiron books, and he certainly gets mystical within that text. So I consider him a mystic, yeah. Though whether or not there's any form of practice with Chiron, I don't know whether or not you could say there is or not. And of course, it's how we're defining mystic as well. So the first question which someone asked, that I've got logged: what conversations made you significantly question or even change your perspective on the discussed issue? So basically, what podcast, what Hermitix interviews have changed my perspective on a discussed issue? The Wittgenstein one was probably the biggest one. I mean, reading that. I mean, ultimately, the interview is in relation to the books that I have to read in preparation for the interview. So reading the books and then going, oh wow, like this has really changed my thoughts on it. Definitely the latest Wittgenstein one, and that's one that still sort of hangs true. Really, that's still lingering in my mind what to make of all that. In the sense that it just completely changed Wittgenstein for me. So that's definitely one. I mean, there's so many conversations now, I can't really think through them all. Certainly in a sense, the more and more you talk about philosophy and ideas, the more and more you move away from politics. So I think a lot of them on a more of a grand scale, I've just become so, not disillusioned, just entirely impartial and unidentified with modern politics. Like I was on Twitter today and saw the thing about people booing Boris Johnson, and I felt I saw it and felt my heart rate slowly rise, noticed that, and just thought, like, it just doesn't, it wouldn't change anything. And I'm getting better at basically just closing Twitter constantly, which I highly recommend. But then there's also a follow-up question from that: what conversations made you significantly question or even change your behavior and future plans? I guess over the years, certain of the more spiritual conversations have probably influenced my moving to the church. So to a certain degree, that probably some of them probably influenced that decision. As for behaviour, more and more I just find especially at the moment, I'm rereading Homageville. And a lot of these discussions really make me realise that, like, ideas is the place to, just imbue yourself with ideas. Just don't worry about the material world all that much. And Homageville, the idea of just being non-identified, being impartial, not being indifferent, but being impartial, and conscious of your disengagement. Yeah. But other than that, I'll have to think on that one a bit more. Declaration says, when are you hosting your next group meal? People are asking for an in-person meetup at some point in the UK, and I'm not really someone, I mean, someone's asked a question about travel, which I'll get to in a bit, but I'm not really someone who does that kind of thing, so I don't know how I'd ever do it, whether or not I would, but a big meal would probably be the way that I'd prefer it. In a way, thoughts on Malachi Martin? I've heard of Malachi Martin. As I understand it, he's a traditionalist Catholic. So I don't. Or is he not a traditionalist Catholic? I don't know. I know the name, but I don't know, all that much about him. Someone asked, do you have any insight into the influence the attack on the Twin Towers had on the CCRU and its dissolution? No, I don't, not really, unfortunately. It's I think I don't know. I don't think it really had anything. There's a little thing there. I mean, but no. The answer is no. I don't have any insight on that. Someone asked, how is Boris Johnson being booed not significant? Well, it's just not significant. We'll have forgotten it by tomorrow if I hadn't mentioned it. If I hadn't mentioned it, you might not have even known about it, and so it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not one who thinks I'm not. I'd like to think I'm not so prideful that I believe I can suddenly one of these people who believes that it can change the world or anything. To be honest, I think you can only really change what's within your immediate sphere of interest. Outside of that, it's a bit of an egotistical thing to believe that you truly can change things. And to the extent that he's booed, well, what does that change anything for my own life? Not in an egotistical way, but in the sense of him being booed sort of imbues people with emotions. They either agree or disagree, right? They either have like a emotional support in the sense of a sort of righteous anger or a righteous feel of justification, or they have a negative emotion in the sense of they like Boris Johnson and they hate the booers. And in both senses, it's really a negative emotion, and it's a complete loss of energy on the half of both camps, and so they just end up being lost in the political spectacle, and then realizing that they just get caught up in the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and at no point really do they just step back and go, actually, being involved in any of this has never done me any good, and I could have been focusing on myself, focusing on my local community, focusing on immediate relationships, and that would have been far more beneficial to my own life. The sort of the whole idea of the globalist world or anything like that, I mean, it's a complete anomaly throughout human history to be able to contact or be outside of your immediate sort of 50-mile radius, if that, and no more than that. And I don't think it's good for the human mind to sort of hold, or at least attempt to hold, that many connections and communications in mind. We're not built for it, and it's not good. And they're not real in that sense. I mean, we have Dunbar's number, but I don't think it's in any sense beneficial to spiritual or personal growth, which I would see as really the aim in a way. Someone asks, how do you reconcile free will or making choices and following God's will, given that we cannot know His will? I mean, that's a huge question. Really, it's like an age-old theological question. So the reconciliation of your own personal will in relation to God's will, which as a Christian you should follow, but you don't know it. I would put an argument forward that in those moments of, so if you go back to the Garden of Eden, you have Eve listening to two voices, right, which is the birth of doubt within history, basically, right? So sure, initially they are listening to God's voice, they're listening to God's will within the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve are listening to God's will, and so they're side by side with Him because they're completely in obedience, as that vow. They're in obedience with God. But as soon as the serpent comes along and Eve simply listens to that voice as if it could be a better or equal alternative to God's, that is where doubt sets in. So what I would say is in those moments of doubt where you have that decision in life of which way you should go, it's been said by many saints that the way that you should go is the way in which one is more humble and there's more humility. Right? The one thing that the devil can't use as a weapon and doesn't have is humility. And so between the two choices, you probably already know that you shouldn't do the thing which, it just so happens that the choice that you get to make is the one that gives you money, pride, status, or whatever, right? So it's probably unlikely it's going to be the case. So that's the practical way I would say, is that in those moments of doubt in life, when you have a choice between 2 or 3 or 4 ways or whatever it is, I think for anyone who has, I'm not saying I have, or anyone who has an active life of prayer, you slowly begin to understand in a language in a way that can't really be explained to those who also haven't had it. You begin to understand what it is to follow something which is really like found within silence. So you can't know His will, but you can know it through obedience, and you come to understand it in a different way, right? It's not language. I'm just going to go back to the previous question about Boris Johnson not being booed, and that's the idea of significance, because that same person has said it changes things because it is a representation of a change in the mood of the county in which you live. Well, I would just argue that it isn't a change, because I haven't, I can only go off anecdotal with regards to my county, and in my day-to-day interactions with the local shops and the local people and people at church, I mean, it's not massively a change in mood in those senses. And the whole idea that everyone has to be politically engaged in the sense of just ignoring their most basic things is probably some form of psyop with regards to just keeping people engaged and not then engaging on it's keeping them engaged in a form of consumption, which really they just spills all their energy into that. Someone says, when will you have Broderick Wallace on? I don't know who Broderick Wallace is, but I'll bookmark that after the chat and look into him. Michael Jones interview when? As much as I'd love to, I don't know how interesting it would be, because it'd probably just be me agreeing with him and just a general chat with is someone I'm mostly in agreement with. What do you think about people trying to revive the CCRU mind virus, especially as you and your work seems to have consciously moved past it in the Landverse? It's weird to me to still see that in a way, because there was this real moment in late 2016, 2017 around Brexit, and Land had this big rebirth, and CCRU accordingly had this big rebirth, and ultimately people like Mark Fisher and his work, which has this, I don't know, I guess more poignant importance politically and socially, is still going strong. But with Land, there was just this moment, and now it sort of seems to have petered out, and it was like, it was this sort of brief 2 years of Land hysteria. If you know, and it's extremely fun work, and I still, like, occasionally will pick up Fang New Mena and just be like, okay, I still have to admit that this is some of the most exciting and original philosophy that I've really ever read, in the sense of it being fun. If people want to do it, I'll still read that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of people who are still doing explainers and saying, who's Nick Land, what's neo-reaction, what's the CCRU, and it's like, this has been done, and I'd like to see people try move beyond it or something about that. Thoughts on the Unheard project? What I'm seeing on Unheard is that they're having a lot of interesting people on, and a lot of discussions. My worry would be that it turns into, I mean, I remember when Vice was somewhat, you could say, quote unquote, dissident or not specifically right-leaning, but I remember when Vice was the alternative place to go, and look what happened there. So, you know, like most things, the bigger it grows, the more danger it is that it just falls into becoming a very normal project. And at the moment, it isn't that, and it's really going right across the board of, you know, some bigger figures that I know, like John Michael Greer, and then other people who've been on the podcast who've written for it, who, you know, aren't as well known, but are getting on there, so they seem to be doing good stuff. Do I think language was a mistake? I have no way of, sort of an unfalsifiable comment, because the only existence I know is one that's entirely imbued within language. I mean, you could begin answering that question by reading people such as Bakhtin or McLuhan or Wittgenstein, and I think there's some answers in there, but of course the answers are always inherently and immediately tied up with language itself. So we always have that problem of, like, the question, do you think language was a mistake, is obviously a question which is already inherently a priori embedded within language, so we're stuck somewhere. What was the significance of twins to the CCRU? I mean, it's been a long time since, I don't think I did twins. I mean, they have the Zizigy thing, and but a Zizigy is twins which have an inherent relationship or something like that. I couldn't tell you off the top. Sorry to say, I don't have too much CCRU knowledge off the top of my head. And it wasn't specifically the angle I took with my CCRU course. The significance of twins, I mean, the twinning process with the numogram is a key one, right? Nick Land interview when? So obviously one of the first interviews I ever did was with Nick Land, and I don't want to listen to it because it's probably quite embarrassing, but that's there if you want to listen to it. Nick said he would also do one once he's finished. I said I wanted to interview him about the Bitcoin book, and he said, oh, I'll do it when it's finished, which basically means I'll probably never get that interview. No offense, Nick. So yeah, I'd love to do one again, but what we talk about, who knows? Do I know my reading rate, words per minute? No, I don't, unfortunately. Do I prioritize what to read and what to skim? I skim most quotes, because usually there's a general pattern with academic work that you notice where, especially academic work, not all work, but academic work, where they'll do this big, like, paragraph of a quote that they've taken out of something, and then below they'll reiterate the quote and why they needed it, right? So, and I wish they'd stop doing that. So I skim most times. They quote people in, and a lot of non-fiction works, purely theoretical works, they're not philosophical but just theory, often could be 2/3 shorter, and you go, okay, well, I've got your point, and unless you're super interested in it, you learn to know when an author's about to string himself out. And I'm of the belief that books really should be around 100 to 200 pages or 600 pages plus, right? There's that in between is a bit of a, you know, an annoying bit. Any upcoming episodes on Thomas Merton's work? I'd love to do an episode on Thomas Merton. I've emailed 2 people about Merton, and I've yet to have any emails back. So I would love to. I mean, he has a huge oeuvre as well, so it would be quite tough to really know where to begin with that. But I'd love to. I mean, I adore Thomas Merton's work. It was a big influence for me moving over to Catholicism, and I think people like Thomas Merton should be. I mean, he is a fairly big figure, but he should be that form of Catholicism, which does have a sort of everyday, daily mysticism to it, which which just, you know, the everyday person can really begin that process of becoming a saint. Can, you know, feel there's something very practical in Thomas Merton's work that I think a lot of people are feel they miss from the outside when they look at Catholicism. And I'll just do a little digression on that, because it's a theory that I've been putting forward quite a few times recently with regard to Ion Culiano's book, Eros and Magic in the Renaissance, where his theory is that when Protestantism came in the 1600s, the Reformation, one of the things they did was, in stripping out the sacraments, they also stripped out a lot of the mystical, very spiritual, heavy sides of Christianity. And they did that in accordance with that new imbued feeling of the Enlightenment and logic and rationality, etc. So they were trying to like appease the people by stripping out everything from Christianity to appease people to keep them in. Of course, this is the thing that you should not do. And Ion Culiano's theory in Eros and the Magic in the Renaissance is that the Catholic Church, though they didn't strip out the sacraments, they saw this and thought, oh, if we want to keep people on board, we need to also strip out the mystical elements, right? And I think this is why, in time, from the Enlightenment onwards through to the present day, this is really when you see a huge uptick in people. You've got Giordano Bruno, you've got the later on in the 1800s, you've got the birth of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. This is where you see a huge uptick in Western esotericism, and I think it's because, for that reason, that people felt from the outside, they're like, well, that thing just looks like an institutional religion, and there's nothing spiritual in there for me. And so people like Thomas Merton, it's such a great thing to see these people coming forward, and often that heritage the mystical heritage is hidden. But back to this person who's chatting about politics and things. Do you not think that checking out of political discourse and organisation is also a current psyop of our time, as checking out of philosophy theology was? No, I don't. It's the idea of a political man or a political being is an extremely new thing. I mean, really, we had what was Freud's? Freud was homosexualis, so sexual man or libidinal man, right? That everything goes through the libido or the sexual process of castration, blah, blah, blah. And then you move through to Homo economicus with Marx, and Foucault takes this up later on. Economic man, who is then entirely imbued into the economy. He's quite literally an economic man. He can't live without that economic tether. Jung takes this up, and he in his process of individuation and the insight into archetypes, he is homo religios, I believe it is, or religious man. He's saying that there's an inherent religious value. And I'd say the latest iteration of that is Homo politicus, right? Like political man. And I just think it's another thing that's just it's a very bad iteration of it, because it's very material. There's people I've known who just basically wasted their lives on politics, right? Nothing's changed. I don't believe in free will in that in the sense that you have this vote and things happen. I just don't. It's just stupid. So I don't think it's a psyop to check out. It will bring you much more peace to do so, because you realise after years and years and years of trying to do stuff with politics, you realise that's really not the layer in which things are actually happening. I mean, most of these problems, as far as I'm concerned, are if you're like a Jungian or a Freudian, or someone with into psychodynamic psychology, then I think we're using the same word when I would say that they're spiritual problems, right? These problems are problems on a much deeper level than this political thing. It's sort of like the political thing is like, we'll move the band-aid, right? On a spiritual level, and an ontological level of being, that's the one where we go, right, how can we actually heal the wound so we don't have to keep moving this band-aid around? And I do think that forms of psychology, proper psychology, are trying to do this, and religion in the same sense is trying to do this, and good theology is also trying to do this. Someone says, am I discerning marriage or monasticism? No, I'm not really discerning in the sense of an active discerning. I'd sort of realise that for now, marriage isn't meant to be for me, as much as I didn't want that to be the case. It's not something that's just in my heart. I know that's not something that's on the cards for a while. And as for monasticism, you're called to that. as I understand it. So whether or not that happens, I don't. But I don't think so. I mean, it's not. You don't have to have a vocation in that sense. That's my understanding. That you don't have to have a vocation, but from that you can find. I mean, I think really my vocation is probably to be. What do you call it when it's like apostolic in the sense of handing on the word? I mean, so many people have, through the podcast and through my book, have come to a place where they've said, you know, you brought me a bit closer to God. So I think that something there is meant to be my purpose, if you want. But yeah, no, I'm not discerning really either of them. Do I believe in Nick Land's concept of hyperstition? Yeah, I believe in hyperstition. Sure, but I don't have much more to say about it. Do I think Hegel is a charlatan? I just love to dunk on Hegel, really. Whether or not he's a charlatan, most philosophers are part charlatan, so yeah. But I don't want to say fully because I've spent a tiny bit of time with the phenomenology. But you know, he's written tons. I haven't read it all, so I couldn't say. I can't answer that. Have I heard of or engaged with the work of Philip Mainlander? I've heard of the work, and he's someone who is cited by Thomas Ligotti in The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, and I don't think there's many good translations of Mainlander's work, so I haven't really engaged with it, but I've certainly heard of him. Have you seen Archbishop Vigano's statements on the pandemic/vaccines? I haven't seen them, no. Was there a one thing that made you choose Catholicism over another denomination? Well, it's the one holy apostolic church, so that was probably the key thing. It's the one true church that Jesus Christ founded, and it's Pentecost this coming Saturday. So you know, it's very apt that you asked that. Do I consider myself an outsider in Colin Wilson's sense of the word, wherein he identifies Nietzsche, Hess, T. Lawrence, and Nijinsky as outsiders? It's been a while since I've read that work. I mean, it's sort of an egotistical thing. I don't want to say what I am in any sense, really. I mean, if people consider me that, to apply a label to yourself is sort of like when a kid gives himself a nickname, right? Like, oh, my friends call me whatever. It's like, no, they don't. Though they need to that thing needs to grow about naturally. Otherwise, it just doesn't really work. So I don't want to say. Least favourite and favourite BBC presenters. So my favourite BBC presenter who I was really into at the moment, I'm rewatching a lot of his cookery programs, is Keith Floyd, who was a brilliant cook and really changed cooking TV. To be honest, everyone who now has cooking TV, in the sense that we're watching the meal being made and they aren't just these weird lectures, is indebted to Keith Floyd. Who else? I don't watch much BBC. I mean, my favourite BBC programme, which I watch every time they release an episode, is a brilliant show called Inside Number 9, by the guys who made League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I just think it's so fantastic. But yeah, so I'd check that out. Thanks for bringing on John Michael Greer as often as you had. Hope you bring him on to discuss his theology and how Christian readers were able to reconcile traditionalism and modernism with it. Yeah, happy to bring him on and discuss theology. I don't know how I'd do that. I'd have to read his new Celtic book, I think. Have you spoken to that Mark Stallman fellow? No, I haven't. Do you believe in the concept of Wetiko mind virus, as outlined by authors Paul Levy? I don't know too much about it, but the idea of a mind virus is it's a good one. Yeah, it's great in novels. It's great in novels such as Ballard and Burroughs and people like this. I think it works well there. Would you like one or two recs on Hegel that would concisely and clearly explain his project, why it's important and why it needs to be engaged with? If you can give me two direct recommendations which genuinely concisely explain his project, then I will do an episode on any theme of your choice, because I have read about 6 books on Hegel and none of them have said anything other than complete nonsense. I've read the Routledge guide? I've read a beginner's guide to Hegel. I've read Jean... what's the one that everyone recommends? That's like the fancy guy who taught Hegel via his lectures, which were then Hippolyte. I'm probably pronouncing that completely wrong. Hippolyte's lectures on Hegel. I also read Kohevi's whatever it is on Hegel, and then I read the Hermetic Hegel thing, and I just couldn't get anything from them at all. Maybe I'm an idiot, or maybe Hegel's the idiot. And I would say that the chances of a highly esteemed philosopher who's been canonized and is spoken about in universities, I would say it's more likely that he's the idiot. and definitely not me. Uh, but if you can give me 2 recommendations, I will read them, as long as they're like fairly short. Okay. Am I being baptized at Pentecost? No, I was baptized in Easter at the Easter Vigil in March. I think some people get confirmed at Pentecost, though. I was confirmed as well in March. What do you think about Ukraine, Russia? They're both lovely countries. Okay, there's 2 great recommendations. Thank you. Okay, back to the other questions. Do you feel as a species we're better run on decentralization? And are monarchies more decentralized than democracies? And can blockchain actually solve all the problems? Are we better run on decentralization? I mean, in the sense of localism, I think it seems to be that way. Decentralization is less fragile. It's reliant on the immediate surroundings. It's reliant on basically small, almost patchworks and states, but it's also reliant on the state not interfering all the time, right? But in the sense of that, when you ask, are monarchies more decentralized than democracies? I mean, I've seen Justin Murphy recently tweeting about like anarcho-monarchism, right? Which is sort of like, I can't even explain that position. But it makes complete sense to me of have this basically a monarchy which keeps control of the huge things and usually has an army in reserve for like basically invasions and things like that. But at the same time, other than that, it does seem, after reading people like Hopper, etc., it does seem that monarchy is just the best way to do things. And almost in a way, I would say that the Catholic Church is, the closest political foundation for the way the Catholic Church is structured is really like a decentralized monarchy, because you do have the hierarchy, but when it gets down to the individual level of individual parishes, there is this contextualized version of it throughout the world. But it's not like French Catholicism, it's Catholicism which is in France, right? So that's the difference. That's where the decentralized, but it's not decentralized. They're always back to the centralization, but there is way more freedom than I think detractors want to say. Back to this political thing. Political manifestations are born out of spiritual foundations. If politics is the next layer of that process, then that is where it happens. Well, no, I would say that's the symptom. That's the symptom. So I mean, this is the thing. So you see this if you read. Both. Oh, I forgot his name. Orestes Brownson, and I'm trying to think of the other guy who I did the chat with, who's the Immanentize the Eschaton guy. His name's completely forgot. Anyway, the fundamental point that both these thinkers are coming from is that when we've attempted to sort of imbue another culture, or imbue another place with the political system of our place, because we were like, look, this has brought about more peace, more order, more safety, etc., more freedom if you want. What you're doing is you're taking the symptoms of a culture and trying to like graft them onto somewhere that doesn't have that culture. And the problem is that you have to build that culture up first. Right, so you have to begin with the spiritual foundations. So it's sort of silly to say, like, Eric Vogelin, that's the one. So it's sort of silly to say, like, well, the politics is the symptoms of the culture, so we just work on the political level. Like, you're working from the symptoms. If on a spiritual or ontological level, then people's ideals are changed in relation to notions relating to freedom, consumption, whatever it may be, then they'll go through into the symptoms. But other than that, it's just messing around the symptoms. You're not going to change the bottom, the structure. What else have we got? Since I've come to Catholicism, what's your parish experience been like? Just lovely, just really warm, welcoming, and for me, very, very English. Yeah, that's all I'd really say. Everyone's been welcoming and lovely, and I've had no, almost immediately, like when people have these conceptions of Catholicism, I'm sure this rings true for probably most denominations. I just would say, well, just go along to church one time, and they'll basically all be dispelled. Did G.K. Chesterton have an impact on my conversion? Not massively. A lot of people were on about orthodoxy, and I'd read a lot before that. And I think if I'd just gone straight to orthodoxy, it would have packed a real punch. It still is a great book, but it was a bit too verbose for me and a bit too playful in a way. So he didn't directly have a huge impact, unfortunately. Um, will you share with us the inception of your spiritual philosophical drive? Is it rooted in my biography at all? I recently did a discussion with Justin Murphy, an interview with him, and I get fairly personal about the how it all came about, with my conversion, with the spiritual things and philosophical things. So that would be a better place to start for that. That would be probably released in the next week or two. It's not massively rooted in my biography, really. I didn't have a vision or didn't do anything like that. I think the thing is, it's sort of like what Gurdjieff talks about people who are looking for more. Like after everything, there's been multiple moments in my life where materially I'm just basically at the point of peak comfort, right? Like drive, apartment, many friends, going out to the pub, good food, in education with a comfortable job, etc. that I enjoy. And it's after those moments, and then you have a girlfriend or whatever as well. You have the full modern package, and it's in those moments where you really need to look and you realize like something is still missing. And ultimately, for me at the start, I thought that was alternative spirituality, actually, for the reasons that I've said. And then you realize, no, it's something bigger, and it's the God-shaped hole. And as much as us moderns, with all our fancy stuff, don't want to, accept it. Most of these cliches are God-shaped hole, as the cliche is completely true, and it was just something that wasn't there, and I needed, and I'm more than happy to say, I'll return to God, etc. Have I read Cynthia L. Haven's book on Gerard? I have not. I'll bookmark it. Did you know? Isn't that Curtis Yarvin's view? I haven't really kept up with. So you have Moldbug and Yarvin. I think it's fairly close to Moldbug's view, though. I'm not huge on the business CEOs. I don't think someone such as what's his name, Steve Jobs, would be a good CEO. I don't want some min-maxing economist businessman as a CEO. I want someone with, the virtues in power. I want someone who isn't coming at their position of power from a place of quantification. I want someone who's coming at it from a place of qualification. Did I know that Tolkien was an narco-monarchist? I really want to get deep into Tolkien's politics, and I'm like halfway through the Two Towers at the moment, just trying to get through the Lord of the Rings before I get into the other stuff. Let's go through. There we go. What are some of my favourite fiction books? I've got this question in the other ones. Fiction books. Homageville. All of Cormac McCarthy's work. Blimey. My mind goes blank when I think of these things. It's really annoying. Journey to the End of the Night. I don't mind Pynchon. Laurus by Eugene Vodolozkin. I don't read huge amounts of. I don't read huge amounts of fiction. I'm just trying to think. I'm reading Way of the Pilgrim at the moment. I mean, that's not really fiction, actually. Anyway, I'm more like authors. Like, I like an author's whole oeuvre. So, like, McCarthy and that form of things I quite like. I like Nabokov as well. Let's see. Would I take Bob Dobbs' ionic medicine? I took Bob Dobbs' medicine, and I had to pass out a kidney stone 2 weeks later. I will talk to him again. And it probably is you, isn't it, Bob? I will talk to you again, Bob. I promise. I'm just literally still doing research, because it's just I've spoken to Bob so much about McLuhan that I'm doing research in the deeper McLuhan, which is quite tough to find and things like that. Are books the main part of your budget after living expenses? It's I sort of like rent, bills, food, then books. Yeah, and that's about really my whole life, to be honest. Would I ever do an episode on the novel Stoner? I could, but it's not a novel I want to like, sort of distill and deconstruct in some sort of postmodern way. It's such a beautiful book. It's one of my favourite fiction books, which I didn't mention in the list when you just asked me. But no, I don't think I would. I'm not huge on doing talks on fiction unless the authors are really, there's some theory out there that I can get into, because you're somewhat destroying the work. So I might do it. I'd love to do an episode on Goethe, but I need to read more. I need to read more Goethe, and I've done Cormac McCarthy, but there's such a depth to McCarthy, I felt you could do it, and I wouldn't mind doing it on people like Dante, etc. But most fiction, I wouldn't want to destroy the experience for someone and say, oh, by the way, this means this, this means this. Have I read Banana Yoshimoto? Nope. What did I think about the conspiracy against the human race? I loved it when I was about 18, and then I realised it's a very pathetic novel written by someone who needs to keep going. People tend to stop at that point, don't. Do I ever get free copies of books? Yeah, often from publishers. I mean, a lot of the interviews are from free PDFs or ebooks that I get sent from the publisher, yeah. Sometimes I'll get free physical ones. What's the deeper McLuhan stuff I'm researching, please? So, like, McLuhan, when he's going on about Joyce, McLuhan's spiritual stuff about his Catholicism, mostly his literary theory with regard to Joyce, but also McLuhan is just far, far deeper than the medium is the message. There's just something more going on there and I want to talk about these things. I mean, Joyce is the big thing, I think, that I really want to get into, especially with Finnegan's Wake. So that's the main thing. Hi, mate. Love your show. How long have you been bald? I've been balding to the point where I needed to shave it since I was 19, and I just shaved it. I didn't care. I always knew I would be. Did you ever use hair growth cream? No, I'm not. I'm so humble, that I just didn't need to. No, I always knew I would be, and so I didn't have a sort of thing where I got to 30 and had an existential crisis. I always knew I'd be bald at a very young age, so it just didn't bother me. So I was 19. Yeah. What's next? Someone said, I said the other day that I'm back to consuming caffeine. Why did I go back? I went back because I found I was just sleeping so much without caffeine. And I realised that I think caffeine is almost like the water of the modern world. If you have to exist, if I was a hermit in the forest, living off the land, with none of the barrage of the modern world, I don't feel I'd need that artificial stimulus. But if you're within the modern world, I think you actually do need some form of artificial stimulus, because you're digesting far more impressions, far more sensual data than you ever would be normally, and you need like an external thing to upkeep that artificial amount of modernity coming into you. Yeah. What are the hallmarks of a wise guest? I mean, the hallmarks of a wise person, which is completely not what I'm doing right now, generally is someone who stops to think before they speak. So they'll stop for a few seconds and then go into it because they're genuinely thinking about it. Another one is just having a control, no ums and ahs, not being sort of taken by the question. Also, I mean, wisdom really is the ability for a guest or someone to be able to say, I don't know, and I mean that's a big thing I'm really respectful of, is when someone can say I don't know the answer to that. And I think it's a very key thing. I mean, modern academia has this sort of panicked response to, like, they have to somehow fill it in, right? And you just say I don't know. Any plans for a Balthazar episode? I'd like to do a Balthazar episode, but as you know, compared to Von Spare, it would be far more difficult. So Von Spare has that mystical angle and very personable angle, and I think with Balthazar, you're really just you're stepping into basically one of the biggest theologians of the Catholic Church in the modern age, right? And where would I even start with that? Any recommendations on where to start with McLuhan? The medium is the Massage, which he did with Quentin Fiore, which also includes a lot of Warhol's work. Is this really quick book, but it puts McLuhan alongside quotes from Joyce, alongside bits of Warhol's work, and gives you this real punch. There's also a great little thing called Counterblast, which McLuhan did, which I think is a great start. I mean, if you want to dive into the main ones, then yeah, sure. The Gutenberg Galaxy is a great start. Yeah, that's where I'd say to start. What caffeine drink am I consuming? Black coffee. McLuhan had some interesting letters to Vogelin. Okay, I'll look into those. Could I not schedule live streams at the same time as Novara? Big overlap in audience. Well, I'm glad you're here and not there. What area authors outside of McLuhan am I feeling drawn to as of late? Blimey, what aren't I being drawn to is probably the better question. I mean, I'm pretty deep into what was called the Munich Circle of Phenomenology. So you've got Husserl, Hedwig Konrad Matthias, Edith Stein. I really want to do some talks on that and bring more of that to light. I'm really into the idea of the sovereign individual, so Omschville, and also the concept of the sovereign individual in general. Other than that, I'm going to start with my Thomist research. See how that goes. Favorite cologne? I don't know the name of it. I do have one, but I don't know the name of it. Floris Santana. Well, you can't recommend colognes, I've heard, because the problem with colognes is that the oils, they're very personal things, so they smell different on two different people, right? Do I have a strong fondness for the Fallout series, particularly 1, 2, and... Yeah, they're quite good. Post-apocalyptic stuff, what do I enjoy? I mean, Canticle for Leibowitz is probably my favourite post-apocalyptic thing, as a novel. Have I tried cold brew black coffee? I've had it before, and I think it can be good, but you have to have great coffee to do it. But also cold brew black coffee is sort of a dangerous thing, because a boiling hot cup of coffee, you can take your time with it, and you can't rush it. But cold black coffee, just down it. Which film directors do you like, and how do I feel about David Lynch? I mean, I adore David Lynch. I love David Lynch. I was really into David Lynch when I was in university, and I've watched basically everything David Lynch has done, and I think what he's managing to do on film is fantastic. And then the fact I can't really explain it or articulate it, and that's what good film should do, much like Tarkovsky. And I think as a person he's brilliant as well. I like his fact that he doesn't give in to questions. He doesn't want to explain his stuff. Other directors I'm a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan. I'm a huge Stanley Kubrick fan. I'm a bit of a sort of almost stuck in my university era of directors in a way. There's a director who I really like who did Bone Tomahawk, Dragged Across Concrete, and Brawl in Cell Block 99, I believe it's called. Those 3 films. I can't remember the director's name. He's also written some novels that I'd like to read, but those films are fantastic, so I keep an eye on him. There is a guy who did Yellowstone and Hell or High Water, the writer of those, and also a director. I'm a big fan of him. Favorite Bible story would be, I don't know specifically what the name of it, someone will have to look it up. I don't have a great memory for these things. Favorite Bible story is, a rich man can't, if it's a very small one, but the idea of a rich man, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. The way is small, and there are few who will go through it. I mean, that general idea. Yeah. What do I do to remember all the information I take in? Any tips? Just remain conscious while you're reading. Try to be, when you're reading, try to be conscious of the fact you are also reading. Because sometimes you just get so identified with the text that you are actually going off on your own tangent. And if you actually just remember that you're reading, remember the thing you're reading, then you take it in. But I don't take in all that much, and I know to take notes. I've taken notes in the past, and it's not a waste of time for me. For some, it won't be. So it's a very individual thing. Do you have any Hermitix episodes on Avola? I did have one that got taken down, but if you want the link for that, then just pop into the Discord and I'll send it over to you. Would I ever have Campbot on? No, he's blocked me, and it's just not. There's nothing really there. I mean, people constantly try to draw me into this form of internet drama. I have no interest in it, and I wouldn't have him on out of some personal grudge or anything. I wouldn't have him on because I'm just not interested in having Twitter personalities on. Not saying that I'm not a Twitter personality, but no. What kind of music do I listen to, if at all? I just listen to The Shire on repeat. No, I listen to a lot of fairly soppy folk music, sort of like Iron and Wine and things like that. And occasionally I'll have a binge of like 80s love ballads. I also listen to a fair amount of classical. Some hymns, actually. Do I consider Frank Herbert, author of Dune, to be a sort of prophet? I couldn't get through Dune. I've tried about 3 times and I get a third in, and it's too verbose for me, to be honest. How do I feel about schizo posting subsectine? I don't know much about it really. I've heard of this name, Angelicism01, though. I think they followed me. I don't know anything about it. Anyway, back to the other ones. What do I think of WB Yeats? I haven't read any of his work, so I can't comment. Has my own answers to the Hermitix question changed from when you started the podcast to now? Well, when I started the podcast, I wasn't a Catholic, and I was more into alternative spirituality. I mean, it changes quite consistently, really. I mean, at the moment, it would be Ernst Jünger, George Gurdjieff, and Edith Stein, Saint Edith Stein. So it'd be, a pretty potent room, really. I get asked this question a lot. It almost makes me, the next question that is, I almost makes me think I should do a separate video for it, because some reason people keep coming to me and asking this. Should I get a PhD? And I always answer this the same way, is get a PhD. There should be one reason, really, that you get a PhD, which is that you want to teach that thing, or you want to go into that field. If you want a PhD in philosophy, it's because you want to teach philosophy. Why I say this is because if you're getting a PhD for any other reason, that you just want to research it, that you want the PhD for prideful reasons, like you want to be able to be called a doctor, or you want to become an independent researcher, I would say in the MA it seems at the moment is enough, because really with a PhD, you from what I understand, I don't have a PhD, so I'm only speaking from what I've been told, you are going to be sat in a room on your own for about 6 to 7 years, reading the same stuff, being very stressed, very lonely, and probably very underpaid. So only get it in those circumstances that you have a reason that you want the thing. And I would say the same actually for most liberal arts degrees, is you need make sure that you go, actually, yeah, this is what I want to use the degree for. If not, we need to get back to that understanding, and many more people are, that it's fine to be an autodidact and to just have an interest without feeling this impulsive modern need to have a credential, as if you need some sort of proof that it's okay to have knowledge or to study something. You can go read Jung without permission. You can go read Kant without permission. You don't need the credential. Just go do it. It's fine to do. What thinker did I initially hate but did a complete 180 on? There's no one I don't think there's any thinker I hate. Even Marx, I would say, why would I hate Marx? I don't hate them. So there's no one I've done a 180 on. I'm trying to think if there's anyone I've come round to in time. But no, there isn't, which probably means I was correct from the get-go. Would I be opposed to book clubs being started by patrons? No, someone asked this. I'd love for patrons to run book clubs and to be able to do it via the Discord, via the things that I've set up, and if they just message me and say, look, this is a reading group that I want to do, and then use the network so they can get more people in, and I'll obviously join in if we can find it, if it's a good time, then more than happy for other, for the community to set up book clubs and whatever they want to set up, even if it's like a discipline group. I know there's big things around that at the moment, so they want to, yeah. Have I read Dostoevsky's work? If so, which novel is your favourite? I've read Notes from the Underground. I found that okay. It's been a long time, and sometimes I look at a huge novel and I think this is just such an undertaking of time. No, I haven't spent too much time with Dostoevsky, unfortunately. How do I feel about Marguerite? Is that meant to be Margaret? Marguerite Kemp. This probably is meant to be Marguerite. I don't know anything about her, unfortunately. Which visual artists do you like, and what is it about their work that you admire? I like Anselm Kiefer, Gerhard Richter, Clifford Still. I don't mind, to be honest, I don't mind Duchamp. I like Warhol. Yeah, there's a lot I like, spent a lot of time in art school looking at art. Ad Reinhardt is great. Yeah. What is it I admire about them? I mean, that's, once again, you're speaking about a different language, so I can't exactly say. Have I ever been given a tarot reading? No. And I'm not in a place where I want one. Do the insights of mysticisms and scriptures warning of adding/subtracting ever conflict for you? if this is in relation to the warning of Scripture, basically saying, don't venture into hell for the knowledge that it might give you, or of looking elsewhere, if there's a confliction with my interests with such books as Meditations on the Tarot and the spiritual stuff I look into, I understand them in the light of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is very open about this, and it's one of the reasons I like the Church, is it says that, and it even says that, because ultimately, if there is one God, which there is, if there is this one God as the Church puts forth, and only one, then that which came before Revelation and that which was before the writing of the Bible as well, Plato, Aristotle, those who were sincerely, with humble hearts, looking for the truth, would have done so with some amount of light. With, this is what the Catechism says. It says there have been rays of light throughout history, but the full light of truth is in the Church and with the Gospels and with Scripture. And that's my agreement. I think to say that other people can't come to, and to say that the idea of revealing is only at this one time, that can't work. But equally, you have to be very, very careful with this. And actually, we mentioned her earlier. Adrienne von Speer actually has a brilliant thing for this, where she says that there's there's collective and objective visions or mystical experiences, and then there's private, subjective mystical experiences. And it's those, basically, she creates these rules and laws, where she says one of the rules of private mystical experiences is that they can't contradict and negate the revelation which has come before. And ultimately we've seen this with things like the Wonder of Guadalupe and many more visions of the kind, that revelation in a way is still unfolding. Ultimately, revelation, as I understand it, would be outside of time, within the vertical, which is therefore eternal, and so that isn't really happening in the past or the future. Revelation is just happening eternally unto time, from a place where there is no time. Very peculiar to think about, but I don't see contradictions as long as you see the points where usually they begin to veer away from humility. That's when you go, okay, now they're starting to grab onto this thing and use it, and that's the point where you need to veer away and go back. And usually you can read things in the light of the Gospels. Usually most things I read are just bolster my understanding of Scripture. Do I ever post on Lit? Nope. Saw my tweet on losing 15 kilograms. It was actually it's 12 pounds at the moment. Not a question. I'm currently doing OMAD. It's working well. Congratulations, my friend. Good luck and keep it going. Have I ever read any Christian traditionalists influenced by Gwenon, Smith, or Barella? No, I haven't, and I haven't spent too much time with Gwenon. No, I haven't. I've got a couple of books from traditionalists to read. The general, I know who's asked this. The general question is, what is analytical philosophy, and how does Wittgenstein fit with it? So the person who asked this, I know, because I've been discussing it with him. I mean, analytical philosophy after the Hollingworth episode and the Hollingworth biography of Wittgenstein has really changed for me, and I just there is mysticism to be found there, and analytical philosophy after that has become a very peculiar thing, and it's completely changed the way I look at it. Before I saw it as this very material thing of language, but I think ultimately for Wittgenstein what's going on is something that's somehow behind language, on somewhere very peculiar, but I can't really explain it. I mean, I wasn't trained analytically, I was trained continentally, and so it's almost like the inverse has happened between both of them, that the one is actually doing more what the other thinks and the other one's doing more what the other one thinks. The Continentals, ironically, with all their deconstruction and post-structuralism, just end up having a panic and ending up developing what they would consider to be like a sort of a free-floating structure. And so they have to develop these false structures to be able to define anything. And the analytics are sort of trying to find ways out of their structures. Yeah. Ever had the interest to learn a musical instrument? So one, I think every person has things where you go, that's just not something I'll ever be able to do, and that's fine. Geography, can't do geography. I'm absolutely just inept at geography. I couldn't even, dreadful. I can read maps and I can do that, but geography generally I can't do it. Musical instruments, another one. Just can't keep rhythm. I just don't understand it, unfortunately. So no. Why are so many people hesitant about getting David Stove pilled? Because David Stove is the last man. He's the last philosopher. He is the king of kings, and he is where everyone will end up in their retirement. That is what you read. That is when you're burnt out from reading about the body without organs and all that nonsense. You pick up a David Stove and you think, yes, this is it. This is the truth. With a newfound interest in analytical philosophy, do you plan on making any episodes on the philosophy of mathematics? I got a B in mathematics at GCSE in high school. That's English high school when I was 16, and I sort of was so lazy with that. So I don't really think I could do philosophy of mathematics. Now, of course, James Franklin, who came on to talk about David Stove, coincidentally enough, is a philosopher of mathematics, so maybe he could do it. But I'd be very inept, and I've had interviews where I thought, well, I sort of can't really do this because I just don't know enough about the deep foundations of it, right? I'm monolingual. I'm assuming by that you mean one language. Yeah, I only speak English, but that's all you need. Yeah, I only speak English. There's so many languages I'd like to learn, but I just don't sit down and learn them. I'd like to learn German so that I could read Ernst Jünger's collected works, but I'd also like to learn French so I could read the Michel Serres, which should have been translated into English. And there's many others that I, would like to. Which of John Michael Greer's predictions have come true? If you want to know about this, if you go to echosophia.net, his blog, he literally just wrote a post about this, where he's gone over his old work. So that's probably the best place to start. Someone says least favourite race. I would say, what's the race where you have to pass the baton? A relay race. I never liked relay races because there's a real sense of dread about relay races because you're sort of in a position where everyone's watching you. And I never got picked for Sports Day again actually after that year because I just didn't take it seriously. So that is my least favourite race, the relay race. Any travel plans for the future? No. I don't really travel. I live a very quiet life in my apartment, eating pasta, reading. There's a few places I wouldn't mind seeing, but I'll go there with someone else. So I'd go if I don't know. It just doesn't really interest me. It's not the thing that interests me. What are books you'd recommend for those interested in the Christian faith? I mean, this is a difficult question because it depends where you're up to, really, with how you're feeling about Christianity. Whether if you have or have not accepted God as being real yet. That's a big thing. So if you completely you want to believe, if you're in that position, right, it's a very peculiar position, right, because there's almost like 3 stages where it's belief, wanting to believe, and not believing. And the irony about the wanting to believe one is that most people don't realize that they've already moved into that next stage, but they feel they need something, right? So wanting to believe is saying to yourself, oh, I wish I could believe in that, which is already saying, I sort of feel that it's true, but I need something more. In that sense, I wouldn't even recommend a book. What a lot of people don't realize about prayer, and I was told this very, very soon, luckily, but I wish I'd been told it before I'd even... Obviously, you don't get a very good Christian education if you're outside of a Catholic school or something like that. What a lot of people don't realise about prayer is, I think people think that prayer has to be this quite linear, like, right, I want that, or I want to help that person, or I pray for this, or this, or this. And one thing I would say, if you're in that position where I wish I could believe, is say a prayer to God for the strength to believe. Say, look, I'm here, and I'm asking you to just give me the strength so I can believe, so I can pray more. And it seems almost like, wishing for more wishes, or one of those little weird paradoxes, but it's not. It's clearly the thing that your heart wants at that point. So pray to be able to, if you're in that stage of, you're like right on the border of like, I wish I could believe, pray to be able to believe. If, however, you're like, right, I'm here now, where do I go? I need to learn the social, the history, the theology. there's gonna be a Catholic bias. I would begin with Catholicism by Bishop Barron, and I would also begin maybe alongside that, quite an easy read, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, which gives you a very great overview of what it is to just be a Christian. I would also recommend that whole C.S. Lewis set of, especially the Screw Tape Letters. You'll need that sort of early on, and the Great Divorce, which is my favourite. After that, you could go to Chesterton, you go to Orthodoxy, and after that, it really depends where you want to go. If you want to go to history, then there's a brilliant one, The Founding of Christendom by Warren Burrell, I think it is, which is like a multi-volume set, and really well researched. And for those that are like historically or scientifically minded, who go, well, how did the sea part? You know, he genuinely answers all these things amazingly well. Theology, maybe begin with Introduction to Theology by Sheed. Brilliant book. If you're about the spiritual life, personal Catholic spiritual life, Fulton Sheen is brilliant on that. Thomas Merton, Seven Storey Mountain. There's so many ways to go. Do you know why Lovecraft became more relevant in recent years? I think it... Oh, sorry, there was a question before that. With the regularity of your podcast releases, and considering the length and density in some of the books we've discussed, do I ever struggle to get through a book fully in time for the conversation? No, because I will just email them saying I'm still doing research, and I'll always take the time and make sure I finish it. And that's where most of my time is, that I just have to read these books. Back to the Lovecraft question, why is he relevant in more recent years? There's a brilliant opener to one of the Lovecraft books where he says that madness is to do with man if man could correlate all his inner knowledge, then he would surely go mad. And I think maybe the interest in Lovecraft is that really the modern world and the internet is actually access to the potential ability for us to begin to correlate all our inner world. So Lovecraft is someone who, even though he didn't know of any of this thing in a technological level, I think what he's talking about when he's talking about the labyrinthian madness of Cthulhu and these underworlds, these indescribable domains, is really talking about the schizophrenia of the modern world in a certain sense. I mean, that's one reason he could become popular. Now that I've converted, how do I feel about the book you wrote on Nick Land? I mean, in a quite ironic way, the methodology of possession and Be Not Afraid. Be Not Afraid is like an answer to the predicament that the person at the end of methodology of possession finds himself in. So I there's a part of me that's like, oh, should I get rid of that book because there's some atheistic stuff in it? And absolutely not. I think that's where I was, and ultimately that book had nowhere to go. The protagonist in that book had nowhere to go, and he was completely lost. And one is really the answer to the other, and it's a simple answer. It's a stupidly simple answer. What's your level of concern currently vis-a-vis AI, cybernetics? AI, no concern. Cybernetics, I mean, that's a field of communication. I don't have any concerns with it. VR, no concerns. The metaverse. I was quite bullish on it when it first arrived because I thought they were finally going to try and make the leap, but it won't go anywhere again. Do I think you'll eventually do episodes on Christian Catholic mystics like Meister Eckhart? I've slowly started doing ones on Catholic mystics. If you go to the channel, there's a little playlist called Theology and all the ones I've done there, so there's a few. Will I ever hold an IRL lecture people could attend? Yeah, but not in London, so I don't know where it would be. I've heard of the effective altruism movement. I don't know I've just heard of it. I don't know much about it, so I can't comment on that. Do I rate Fauerback's books? I haven't read any of them, sorry. What do you think of Zero HP Lovecraft? He's great. I've spoken to ZHP quite a lot in the past. He's a great guy. And yeah, his Twitter account is brilliant. There you go. What do I think of transhumanism? Also, do you think technological singularity is possible? Transhumanism, it's just another... I mean, we do the same things over and over and over and over again. And even you could even say that these early heresies in the Bible of people mutilating themselves in certain senses as to try and go beyond the human was the stupidly early forms of transhumanism. People just can't accept their limits. Just accept it. Everything's so much better when you do. And all our transhumanism, like, no one's living longer. No one's happier. No one's more content. No one's got like technological arms. It's whatever. It's just nonsense. Technological singularity. I don't know. I mean, the theory of that was it would be something that's outside of time. So if it is going to happen, then it already has, I would say, about that. What are my thoughts on Akhenaten, both the figure and the opera? I don't know anything about it, sorry. Are Christianity and modernity totally irreconcilable? It's the duty of a Christian to deal with modernity. It's the duty of a Christian to not immediately wish to change. I'm trying to remember the quote from the Gospels about evil. You know, so it's almost like do not stop it, right? It's like do not stop evil or something like that. But obviously that's not how it's meant. Someone will have to find it. But the point I'd say with modernity is you have to remember that evil can't create anything of its own. So all I would say is that modernity, if we consider it to be evil in that undercurrent of whatever it is that we probably do, the modern, whatever that is as an evil is only ever a mutation and an alteration of the good. Evil cannot create of itself, right? That's why the orcs in Lord of the Rings, they're these just deformed, horrible, they're not humans, are they? They're deformed elves, right? And everything you see that's evil in Lord of the Rings is a mutation of a good, and thus is a lesser version of it, right? Resist not evil, thank you. And so it's not a resistance, it's a realization that if modernity is evil, therefore it's only a mutation of something it's good, which implicitly allows us to understand that there must be some way and sense we can strip stuff back and go and find the good that is there. There's always good there to be had, and I think it's possible to find it. So it's not irreconcilable, but between the two, between Christianity and modernity, the Christian has a duty, and the duty for the Christian is, in a little sense, what he writes about in Presence in the Modern World, is to, in all moments, retain in him the presence of the kingdom of God, and to act accordingly in the temporal now in relation to the eternal eschaton which is coming, right? In short, what would Jesus do right now? What should I do in relation to me getting to the kingdom of God? You know, what is the good that can be done? I've done a number of episodes on Elul. Do I know anything about Karl Barth? All I know about Karl Barth is he's one of the most well-known theologians ever. I'm really reluctant to really begin with big theologian discussions because it's more personal than philosophy, and I think people are going to be more hot on me getting it wrong. So that's quite a way off with that. What are my thoughts on religious pluralism within a society? Well, it's like most things, right? That I mean, a lot of people are saying this politically now. If we talk about political pluralism in a certain sense, is that the side that wants to be left alone will never win. Right, so with regards to religious pluralism within a society, well, it can only last as long as all of them either want to be left alone or all of them are in some sort of ecumenical agreement. But of course, if inherent within certain of those religions is a form of superiority which is justified by their scripture, then that whole thing is going to crumble. So it's like an ideal which is fine, but then suddenly isn't, right? And people want to ignore that. Someone asks, how do I feel about the Friedrich Nietzsche? You know what I feel about Friedrich Nietzsche? I think Saint Therese of Lisieux, she wrote a little thing called My Brother Nietzsche, I believe. I might be wrong in that. Someone will have to tell me, but I believe she did, and I like that idea. And I think Nietzsche I see as the pinnacle of the horseshoe, right, of atheism. Nietzsche's not, he's beyond atheist, right? So the horseshoe sort of begins with the Victorian skepticism and the 1600s post-Reformation, the beginning of skepticism, the beginning of the Enlightenment, the beginning of rationalism, etc. And this horseshoe continues round through each of these thinkers. And Nietzsche sort of understands this, and he tries to push it. And I'm going to say he wasn't successful. I don't think he thinks he would have been. He's only successful to the point that you can just continually adhere to this sort of vitalist impulse in the world. And that's exhausting. Humans need that serene rest. What I mean by the horseshoe is, however, is that it comes back round, and actually you see with the new atheists that they're actually just at the same position, if not worse, than the original atheists there. And so it's like you've missed the boat with Nietzsche. And I think that's in the sense that you can someone here slamming the door a lot. That's in the sense that you could say that Nietzsche's a failure because they didn't. Nothing took root with the new atheists that followed. But I feel sorry for Nietzsche. You know, he was clearly the great irony of Nietzsche. The great irony of Nietzsche is that he lived in himself internally, clearly, an extremely, more so than most people ever would, Christian life. Right? His asceticism, his dealing with suffering, with, you know, the constant headaches, the vomiting, the sort of the search for truth amidst this sort of madness that he had of the world, amidst this asceticism and this sort of monastic retreats to the mountain. He lived almost a life of like a desert father, and yet he lives it in the inverse, in a way, in a very upside down way. So yeah, how do I feel about him? I'll read him, but how do I feel about him? I don't know. I feel pity for him in a way, I guess. Not like a condescending pity, but yeah, pity. Do I have any episodes on the theology of Losky and the Parisian school planned? I don't have any episodes. I have Losky's book though. He wrote the mysticism of the theology of Eastern mysticism or something like that. Have I ever read any of Eric Prudsvara? No, I have not. What are my terminal values? Do I lean more towards deontology, consequentialism, or virtue ethics? My values are really like the foundations, Catholicism, which goes through to like a Gagefianism, then the anarch, and then so it filters through. I should say it filters down actually. Those are my values. Unfortunately we did favourite films and directors. We didn't do favourite films. Favourite film, if you want to know my favourite film ever, it's 5 Easy Pieces. Then Tombstone. Then Heat. Best films ever. That is all the questions that were asked via the other forms and forums. So if anyone has any more that they would like to ask, I'll give you a couple of seconds to just do so. Thoughts on Brexit? Just doesn't matter. It mattered a lot at that time, right? But it just does not matter. I've just got no thoughts on it because it just didn't really affect anything, unfortunately. Yeah. So it's another thing with regard to politics that I'm just like, well, I would never be in a position to know whether or not something was genuinely affected by Brexit or not. It would just be complete hearsay or nonsense to me. Have I read any Salomon Maimon? There's a small thing, yeah, translated by him. I think I did try read it a while back. I didn't know it was translated by one of Land's students. But I can't remember anything from it, unfortunately. What did I say? I didn't say anything about Maestro Eckhart. Do I watch any sports? I watch someone here who's literally just stood outside the door, slamming it over and over and over again. I watch snooker religiously when it's on, and I currently am now really getting into Formula One, the sport of kings. You know, I'm critical of modernity, but give me the latest and greatest in sporting motor vehicles, burning masses of petroleum around horribly kitsch American tracks, and I'm a happy man. If I had to have a fist fight with any philosopher, who would I choose? Rousseau, but I think he'd like it. What are my thoughts on the Amish in America? I mean, the Amish are, when people go on about like ethical consumption under capitalism and the fact that like you have to consume. I mean, the Amish are really this proof of people's revealed preference with regard to the modern world, right? Like they're like, well, we don't want to just become like that, but it's like, well, so you do want all the fancy stuff and blah blah blah. What do I think of humane eugenics? Do you support the use of things like gene editing, CRISPR, and no, I don't support the use of anything like that because it's altering God's creation. Do I like Tyson Fury? I don't know him. When are you going to have Dale Brunsfeld on again? It's premiering in 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks, and it's like 2 hours long. It's a good one. So yeah, I'll open more questions, but yeah, please check out hermitix.net and then go to the forum, hermitix.discourse.group, where there's more discussions. If you want to have a discussion, just start it up. It's completely fine, completely free as well. And then also this coming Monday is the beginning of the St. Augustine Confessions reading group, where we'll be beginning with book 1, and the link for that will, if you go to the site, it's in the like confessions. There's in the news bit. There's a confession thing, and it's in there. And then the link to the room where we'll be chatting is also in there. Thoughts on Kierkegaard? Why has he been lost? I mean, this is a really great question. I think about this a lot. He's sort of often constrained into existentialism, or he's constrained into like a Christian thought. I think he's very unique, and he was very ahead of his time when he was. So he's very difficult to fit into things. And he's an emotional guy, you know. The Academy's not always great with those people. And I want to spend more time with his work. I can live eternally as any race from Middle-earth. Which do you choose? I think it probably would be a dwarf. It probably would be a dwarf. Just hammering away at mining all day and then just eating. Bliss. Yeah, dwarf. Do you see any contradiction between a withdrawal from contemporary politics and the idea that those who just want to be left alone will always lose? Or do you see these as compatible? I mean, it's a great question. It depends what you want to change. It depends how much skin in the game you've got. I'm single with no children, not even married. So, to me, the real skin in the game of the world is when you have children. You know, that's the real worry, the real risk, the real fear. So, and it depends what you want to change in the world. But yeah, I would say it's something I'll have to think on with regard to that contradiction. Prince Harry or Prince William? I'd say Prince William now. I think he's doing a great job. I'm just ending up talking about normie stuff on the podcast. Do a stream about the Queen's Jubilee. Thoughts on the celibate life? Well, if you're not married, then you should be celibate. Thoughts on it? I don't really. It doesn't. I think most people who were converts, especially men, think it's going to be more of a big deal for them than it is, and it's really peculiar. I can't go into this too much because it's something that's difficult to explain. But it's just something that, in a certain sense, it's both the understanding of it and the internal understanding of it. Something's dropped off, and it doesn't really bother me that much anymore. The idea of that. I mean, if you mean thoughts on whether or not, I mean, that's the way it's to be unless you're married. Yeah. How does one get better at philosophy? It depends what your goals are in philosophy. You know, everyone's constrained in a way with the questions that they're asking. I mean, questions for me are usually regarding being and freedom, but for you they might be epistemological. You know, how we know what we know. Might be even more constrained. So, you get better by just reading more with regards to your preferred questions. Someone asked about Haven's book on Girard earlier, and I haven't read it. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that covers pretty much everything. Thanks for all everyone's support who support me, and thanks for listening. This has been fun. I always like answering your questions. I think I've covered them all. I'm just double checking. Yeah. I think it's about everything. Thanks everyone for coming. And thanks for everyone for listening or watching. And yeah, reading group is starting on Monday. If you can't find the details, then DM me on Twitter or something. But other than that,